The security footage at Harborview Apartments in Atlanta, Georgia would later show exactly what happened on the afternoon of March 14th. A well-dressed black couple in their mid-40s walked through the lobby of the building, pulling a single rolling folder behind them. They were calm, polished, and professional in every way. They had scheduled a tour of a two-bedroom unit on the 5th floor. They had called ahead. They had confirmed. They had done everything right. Richard Colton, the property manager and part owner of Harborview Apartments, spotted them from across the lobby. His expression shifted the moment he saw them. He made a phone call, he walked in the opposite direction, and then he sent his assistant to deliver a message. What Richard Colton did not know was that he had just made the single worst decision of his entire career. The couple standing in that lobby were not just any tenants looking for a home. They were Federal Judge Marcus Lawson and Federal Judge Diana Lawson, two of the most respected names in the United States federal court system. And what Colton did next would cost him his property, his reputation, and $3.4 million. Before we get into this story, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you are new here, please hit that like button and subscribe. This story is going to get a lot more satisfying, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Marcus Lawson had spent 27 years in the law. He started as a public defender in Atlanta, fighting for people who had nobody else in their corner. He spent 11 years doing that. Late nights, low pay, and cases that would keep most people up at night. He represented clients who had been wrongfully accused, clients who could not afford bail, clients who had fallen through every crack the system offered. He believed in the work even when the work was hard, especially when it was hard. After that, he moved into federal prosecution, where he handled some of the most complex financial crime and civil rights cases in the southeastern United States. He put away corrupt officials, dismantled fraud operations, and won cases that other attorneys had written off as unwinnable. He had a reputation for being meticulous, not flashy, not aggressive, just deeply, methodically prepared. 6 years ago, the President of the United States nominated him to the federal bench. The Senate confirmed him. He became a sitting federal judge at 43 years old. In his courtroom, he was known for being fair, patient, and absolutely impossible to fool. Attorneys who tried to cut corners in his court learned that lesson quickly. Diana Lawson's path was just as impressive. She graduated top of her class from Howard University School of Law. She spent a decade in private practice as a civil rights attorney, winning landmark housing discrimination cases that set legal precedents still cited in courtrooms today. She did not just win cases, she changed the legal landscape. Her arguments had been referenced in appeals court decisions in 4 different states. She joined the federal bench 4 years ago after her own presidential nomination. She was sharp, prepared, and known for running one of the most efficient courtrooms in the district. Attorneys who appeared before her said she had a way of cutting straight through complicated arguments and identifying exactly what actually mattered. Nothing got past her. Together, Marcus and Diana Lawson had over 50 combined years of legal experience. They had seen housing discrimination cases from both sides of the courtroom. They knew the law better than most people alive, and they absolutely knew when someone was breaking it. That afternoon in March, they were simply looking for a new home. They had recently relocated from Washington, D.C. back to Atlanta, the city where Marcus had started his career. They had researched Harborview Apartments online, liked what they saw, and made an appointment. That was it. Nothing suspicious, nothing complicated. Just 2 people trying to find a place to live, the same as anyone else. They arrived at Harborview Apartments at exactly 2:00 p.m., on time, as scheduled. The lobby was clean and modern. A young white couple was just finishing their tour upstairs, laughing about something as they stepped off the elevator. The assistant at the front desk smiled at Marcus and Diana and asked them to wait a moment while she checked on their appointment. That wait turned into 10 minutes, then 15. The assistant disappeared into a back hallway twice. She was on the phone during one of those trips, not at the front desk, but back where they could not hear what was being said. When she finally came back, her expression had shifted. She was still trying to be polite, but something had changed behind her eyes. She said that Mr. Colton wanted to let them know the unit they had inquired about had just been taken off the market. The couple who had just come down from upstairs, the ones finishing their tour, had apparently put in an application. Marcus asked calmly whether that application had been approved yet. The assistant said she did not know. Diana asked whether there were any other available units in the building. The assistant said she would have to check with Mr. Colton. She disappeared for another 5 minutes. When she came back, the answer was no. No other units were available. The building was fully committed. Marcus had been in courtrooms long enough to recognize when someone was being evasive. The assistant could not make eye contact. Her answers were too short and too careful. Her body language was tight, like someone who had been given a script and was trying hard to stick to it. He asked if he could speak directly with Mr. Colton. The assistant said he was busy with another matter. She was sorry. There was nothing else she could do. Marcus did not push further. He stood there for a moment, letting the silence sit. He had spent decades in rooms where people were hiding something. Courtrooms, interrogation rooms, deposition rooms. He knew what it looked like when someone was saying words they had been told to say, rather than words they believed. The assistant in front of him was not lying because she wanted to. She was lying because someone above her had made a decision and handed it down. That distinction mattered legally. It would matter a great deal later. Diana felt it too. That specific, suffocating frustration of knowing exactly what is happening to you and having no immediate way to prove it. She had represented clients who described this feeling in testimony. She had listened to their accounts with empathy and professionalism. Standing in that lobby, she understood those accounts in a way she never quite had before. This was not abstract. This was real, and it was happening to them right now, in a building they had every right to be in. Diana looked around the lobby. On the wall near the elevator, there was a framed listing board showing available units in the building. The 5th floor 2-bedroom unit they had come to see was right there in the second row, marked with a green available tag. She took a photo of it with her phone. The timestamp read 2:21 p.m. What happened next is where things get very important. Diana pulled out her phone and sent a text message to a colleague, a white woman named Claire, who worked in a different department of the federal court system. She explained the situation briefly. She asked Claire to call Harborview Apartments and ask about the same unit, same floor, same number, same building. Claire called within minutes. The assistant who had just told Marcus and Diana that the unit was taken off the market told Claire that yes, the 2-bedroom unit on the 5th floor was absolutely still available. She could come in for a tour at 4:00 p.m. that same afternoon. The same unit, available again, within 7 minutes of being told it was gone. Marcus and Diana stood in that lobby and let the truth settle around them. They had been denied housing, not because the unit was taken, not because of their application, not because of anything they did or said. They had been denied because of what they looked like. Richard Colton had looked across that lobby, seen a black couple, and made a decision. It was his worst decision ever. Marcus and Diana did not confront Colton on the spot. They did not raise their voices. They did not make a scene in the lobby. Instead, they did something far more effective. They started documenting everything right then and there. Diana wrote down the name of the assistant, the exact times, every word that had been exchanged. Marcus noted the layout of the lobby, the position of the security cameras mounted near the entrance and the elevator bank, and the fact that the conversation had taken place in full view of those cameras. He looked directly at one of the cameras on his way out. He wanted to make sure his face was captured clearly. He knew they were going to need that footage later. They asked the assistant one more time for her full name. She gave it. Marcus asked for a printed business card for the property management office. She gave that too. Diana asked for the official mailing address for ownership correspondence. The assistant looked uncertain but found it in a file and wrote it down. They thanked her politely and walked out. They sat in their car in the parking garage and called Claire, who was already on her way to her 4:00 p.m. tour. They asked her to record everything she could using her phone, not secretly, but openly. Recording in common areas is legal, and they wanted this done cleanly. Claire agreed without hesitation. She had understood the moment Diana texted her what was actually happening. During her tour, Claire asked the assistant how long the unit had been available. The assistant said it had been on the market for about 3 weeks. Claire asked whether anyone else had looked at it recently. The assistant said a couple had come in earlier that afternoon, but they had decided not to move forward with the application. Not that the unit had been taken, not that there had been an offer. They had simply decided not to move forward. That was a lie, a specific, detailed lie. And it directly contradicted the story that had been given to Marcus and Diana just 90 minutes earlier. Claire documented the tour, the assistant's statements, and the full availability of the unit. She also photographed the same listing board in the lobby, still showing the unit as available, green tag still in place. Quick question. Have you or someone you know ever been treated differently when trying to rent or buy a home? Type yes in the comments if you have. You are not alone, and this story is for you. Over the next 48 hours, Marcus and Diana expanded their investigation. They searched online forums, community housing boards, and local neighborhood groups. They found 3 other black individuals who had reported strikingly similar experiences with Harborview Apartments in the last 2 years. One woman said she had called about a unit, been told it was available, shown up in person, and was told within minutes that it had just been rented. Another man said he had paid the application fee and never received any response, while his white co-worker applied at the same building 2 weeks later and was approved within 48 hours. A third person, a black physician who had tried to rent at Harborview 18 months earlier, said she had been told the building had no vacancies. She had checked the building's online listing the very next day and found 4 available units posted publicly. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Richard Colton had been doing this for years with the quiet confidence of someone who had never once been held accountable. That was about to change. 5 days after the incident, Marcus Lawson sent a formal letter to Harborview Apartments and to Richard Colton personally. It was written on plain paper with no judicial title, no court letterhead, no suggestion of his position. He and Diana had agreed they would pursue this as private citizens. This was not about their authority, it was about their rights. The letter stated that they had experienced what appeared to be racial discrimination in direct violation of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. It laid out the full timeline, the confirmed appointment, the unexplained denial, the 7-minute gap, Claire's call, and the listing board photo timestamped at 2:21 p.m., showing the unit still marked as available. It requested a formal written explanation. It gave Colton 14 days to respond. Colton's response came through his attorney, and it was a serious mistake. The attorney's letter claimed the unit had genuinely been taken off the market due to maintenance issues discovered that morning. It claimed the couple who had toured the unit earlier that day had expressed strong verbal interest and had been given priority. It claimed that when Claire called, the assistant had not yet been properly informed of the maintenance hold and had made an error in good faith. The problem with that explanation was extensive. First, the listing board in the lobby had shown the unit as available at 2:21 p.m., after the supposed maintenance hold had been placed. Second, Claire's recording showed the assistant describing the unit in detail during her tour, discussing features, pricing, and move-in dates, not mentioning a single word about any maintenance issue. Third, the building's own online listings had continued to show the unit as available for 3 more days after the incident before it was quietly pulled. Marcus and Diana had screenshots of all of it with timestamps. Colton's attorney had submitted a written official response that was directly contradicted by documented evidence on 4 separate points. Both federal judges recognized it immediately for exactly what it was, not just discrimination, but a deliberate, documented cover-up attempt. And cover-ups in federal civil rights law carry their own separate and serious consequences. Do you think Richard Colton knew exactly who he was dealing with when he turned away the Lawsons? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Marcus and Diana filed a formal complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development the same week the response letter arrived. They also reached out to the 3 other people who had reported discrimination and asked if they would be willing to come forward officially. All 3 said yes immediately. The case was now far bigger than one rejected rental appointment. It was a documented, multi-year pattern of racial housing discrimination, and it had a paper trail that Richard Colton could not talk his way out of. The moment Richard Colton's legal team discovered who they were actually dealing with, everything changed overnight. It came out during the early stages of the HUD investigation. An investigator formally requested the professional backgrounds and employment information of the complainants as part of standard case documentation. The response came back within 24 hours. Federal Judge Marcus Lawson, United States District Court, Northern District of Georgia. Federal Judge Diana Lawson, United States District Court, Northern District of Georgia. Word got back to Colton within hours of that filing. By all accounts, the color drained from his face. His attorney reportedly called the Lawsons' legal representative within 24 hours to quietly ask if there was any possibility of a private resolution, something low profile, handled discreetly, kept out of the public record. The answer was no. There would be no quiet resolution. There would be a full federal investigation, a complete audit of every tenant application processed at Harborview Apartments over the last 5 years, and a very public reckoning. Colton had assumed that turning away a black couple at the door was a safe, consequence-free decision. He had done it before, with other people at other times. Nobody had ever pushed back with enough force to matter. Nobody had ever had the knowledge, the documentation, or the resources to take it to where it needed to go. He had no idea that the people he dismissed that afternoon could have him standing before a federal judge, and in the cruelest irony of all, that judge might be one of the two people he had just refused to rent to. Think about that for a moment. Richard Colton had spent years operating with total impunity. He had looked at black applicants, turned them away, watched them leave, and moved on without a second thought. He had built a system specifically designed to do this quietly. No confrontation, no paper trail, just polite misdirection delivered by an assistant who would take the blame if anyone ever asked. And nobody ever did. Not once in 5 years had anyone pushed back in a way that cost him anything. And then on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March, he made the same call he had made dozens of times before. He looked across that lobby, made his decision in about 10 seconds, and went back to his office. He had no idea that the woman who photographed his listing board on the way out had argued housing discrimination cases before federal appeals courts. He had no idea the man who calmly asked to speak with him directly had sent corrupt city officials to prison. He had absolutely no idea what was walking out of that lobby, and walking straight toward him. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Colton, who had stood in the back of that lobby with all the casual confidence of a man who thought he was untouchable, was now the one scrambling to respond. His attorney was making calls. His business partners were asking uncomfortable questions. His investors were getting nervous. And Marcus and Diana Lawson were calmly, methodically building the most airtight housing discrimination case the Atlanta Federal District had seen in a decade. Colton had looked at two people and seen nothing of consequence. He had been catastrophically wrong. The HUD investigation moved with unusual speed, which is a rare thing in federal housing cases. The combination of well-documented evidence, multiple complainants, a recorded cover-up in the response letter, and a paper trail that directly contradicted the landlord's own official defense made this case unusually clear-cut. Investigators knew what they were looking at. HUD investigators subpoenaed 5 years of rental records from Harborview Apartments. What they found was ugly and consistent. Of 47 applications from black prospective tenants over that 5-year period, only 6 had been approved, a 12% approval rate. The approval rate for white applicants in the same window was over 80%. In several documented cases, black applicants with higher credit scores and higher incomes than approved white tenants had been rejected without any written explanation. One application had been marked "does not meet qualifications" for a person who earned 3 times the income requirement. 3 more former applicants came forward after the investigation became public knowledge. In total, 9 people filed formal discrimination complaints against Harborview Apartments and Richard Colton personally. 9 separate people, 9 separate incidents, all describing the same basic experience: available unit, inquiry made, sudden unavailability upon arrival. Type the word justice in the comments right now if you think Richard Colton deserved everything that was coming to him. The local news picked up the story first. A prominent Atlanta station ran a segment on the investigation, mentioning that the initial complainants included 2 sitting federal judges. Within 24 hours, it was national news. The headline wrote itself: "Racist landlord turns away black couple. They were both federal judges." It spread fast, very fast. Civil rights organizations publicly called for a full audit of all properties Colton owned or managed. Community groups organized a boycott of Harborview Apartments and 2 other buildings he owned in the metro area. Colton's social media presence was overwhelmed. His property listings collapsed on every major rental platform. The reviews told the story clearly. People who had worked with Colton in Atlanta's real estate community began quietly distancing themselves. Associates stopped returning calls. A commercial lender who had financed one of his other properties requested a review of their agreement. The professional network he had built over 20 years in the industry began to separate from him, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily and visibly, the way people move away from something they no longer want to be associated with. His business partners began distancing themselves publicly and quickly. One co-investor in Harborview Apartments issued a statement saying he had no prior knowledge of Colton's rental practices and was cooperating fully with federal investigators. 2 property management contracts Colton held with outside building owners were terminated within the same week. Attorneys representing those owners made clear they had no interest in being associated with what was unfolding. Richard Colton had spent years carefully building a real estate business in Atlanta. He had properties, contracts, and a reputation, all of it built on a foundation that had now been fully exposed. In the space of 10 days, he watched everything he had built begin to come apart. All because he saw two black people walk through his lobby and decided, without knowing anything else about them, that they did not belong there. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division joined the case 6 weeks after the initial HUD complaint was filed. With 9 complainants, 5 years of discriminatory rental records, a documented cover-up in official correspondence, and a pattern that was statistically impossible to explain as coincidence, the DOJ had more than enough to act decisively. Formal charges were filed under the Fair Housing Act. The specific violations included refusal to rent on the basis of race, application of different terms and conditions for rental based on race, and making false statements during a federal housing investigation. The last charge, false statements, came directly from that attorney's letter, the one that had so carefully contradicted 4 separate pieces of documented evidence. Colton had personally reviewed and approved that letter before it was sent. The DOJ had the emails to prove it. Colton's legal team tried every available angle. They argued that rental decisions were based purely on financial and background qualifications, not race. The rental records demolished that argument. Multiple black applicants with superior financial profiles had been rejected while less qualified white applicants moved in. They argued that the assistant had made innocent communication errors. The recording of her conversation with Claire, captured just 7 minutes after the Lawsons were turned away, showed no confusion, no uncertainty, and no mention of any maintenance issue or prior interest. She had described the unit enthusiastically and offered Claire a 4:00 p.m. tour. There were no errors. There was a policy. They tried to claim the cover-up letter had been a miscommunication between Colton and his outside attorney, that Colton had provided incomplete information and the attorney had unknowingly submitted inaccurate claims. The DOJ presented 3 separate emails showing Colton had read the draft letter, requested 2 specific changes, and then approved the final version for submission. That argument dissolved immediately. Every line of defense collapsed under the weight of the documentation that Marcus and Diana had been quietly and methodically building since the day they walked out of that lobby. If you have made it this far in this story, you are exactly the kind of person who makes this channel worth doing. Please subscribe and share this video. More people need to see stories like this one. The case never reached a full jury trial. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, DOJ involvement, 9 complainants, and a legal team that had no remaining arguments, Richard Colton agreed to a settlement 11 months after the initial incident. The total damages came to $3.4 million. Of that, $2.1 million went directly to the 9 complainants as compensatory and punitive damages, divided based on the specific harm each person experienced. The remaining $1.3 million was paid as civil penalties to the federal government. Beyond the money, Colton was required to surrender all operational control of Harborview Apartments. The building was placed under a court-mandated independent property management company for a minimum of 5 years, with federal oversight throughout. Colton was permanently banned from serving in any landlord or property management role in the state of Georgia. His real estate license was revoked with no pathway to reinstatement. The consequences did not stop with Harborview Apartments. The DOJ investigation expanded to examine 2 other properties Colton owned and managed in the Atlanta metro area. Investigators pulled rental records from both buildings and found the same pattern. Black applicants rejected at dramatically higher rates than white applicants with equivalent or weaker financial profiles. Both properties were placed under the same court-mandated independent management structure. The financial exposure from those 2 additional properties pushed Colton's total legal and settlement costs to nearly $4.8 million when all fees, penalties, and damages were fully accounted for. His business partners did not escape scrutiny. One co-investor who had been involved in management-level decisions at Harborview was separately fined for failing to implement required fair housing oversight protocols. Under federal law, property co-owners have an obligation to ensure their properties comply with fair housing requirements. You cannot simply collect income from a discriminatory operation and claim ignorance. That investor learned that lesson directly. Another co-owner was required to complete federal fair housing compliance training and submit to annual independent audits for 3 years. For Richard Colton personally, the aftermath was total. He had entered the real estate business 2 decades earlier with ambition and a clear plan. He had built a small but profitable portfolio. He owned 3 properties, held management contracts on 2 more, and had been in the early stages of acquiring a 6th building when the investigation began. All of that stopped. The acquisition fell apart when the financing was withdrawn. The management contracts were terminated. And when the settlement was finalized, the legal fees alone had consumed most of what remained of his personal savings. He was 54 years old, banned from the only industry he had worked in his entire adult life, and starting from zero. The ripple effects reached beyond Colton's own portfolio. 2 major Atlanta area property management associations issued updated internal fair housing compliance guidelines following the case, specifically citing the documented methods used to identify and prove discrimination: the test call, the listing board photo, the time-stamped screenshots. A number of landlords and property managers voluntarily requested internal compliance reviews after the story broke nationally. Claire, the colleague who had made that 7-minute phone call, gave a brief public statement after the settlement was announced. She said she had not thought twice about helping. She said the call lasted less than 3 minutes and required nothing from her except the willingness to pick up the phone. She said she never imagined it would matter as much as it did. It mattered enormously. That phone call was the single piece of evidence that converted a personal account into a documented, time-stamped, irrefutable comparison. Without it, Colton's attorney might have had room to maneuver. With it, there was no room at all. Marcus and Diana Lawson returned to their courtrooms. They were careful throughout the entire process not to use their judicial authority to influence the case in any direct way. They pursued it as private citizens, using the same tools and the same rights available to anyone. That was the whole point. The system was supposed to work for everyone, not just for people with titles. Marcus Lawson gave one interview after the settlement was finalized. He sat down with a national news outlet, calm and measured as always. He said that he and Diana had not filed the complaint because they were judges. They had filed it because they were people. Because what happened to them happened to thousands of other people every single year. People who did not have the legal training, the resources, or the platform to fight back effectively. He said something that stayed with a lot of people who heard it. He said, "Every person who has ever been turned away from a home because of the color of their skin deserves to know that what happened to them was not okay, was not legal, and was not something they simply had to accept." Diana spoke about the other 8 complainants who had joined the case. She said that without them, the pattern would not have been as clear or as powerful. She said they were the ones who transformed an individual incident into a systemic case. She said they were brave for coming forward, knowing their names would become part of a public record. She thanked them by name in that interview. All of them. Civil rights organizations across the country used the case as a concrete example of how housing discrimination works in practice, not always with slurs or confrontation, but with a phone call held, a sudden unavailability, a polite assistant following instructions she was not comfortable questioning. Discrimination that is designed to be deniable. Discrimination that counts on people not pushing back. There is something important in the way Marcus and Diana chose to respond. They did not get emotional in that lobby. They did not demand to speak to Colton directly. They did not call a press conference. They walked out calmly, sat in a parking garage, and started building a case. They treated discrimination the way they had spent their careers treating every other violation of the law, as something to be documented, challenged through proper channels, and held to account with evidence. That methodical approach is available to anyone. You do not need to be a judge to take a photo of a listing board. You do not need to be a lawyer to write down the time and the name of the person you spoke to. Documentation is a tool that belongs to everyone. The story of Richard Colton and Harborview Apartments is not really about 2 powerful judges taking down a prejudiced landlord. It is about what happens when discrimination is documented carefully, challenged persistently, and treated as the serious federal violation it actually is. Colton made his decision in what he assumed was a safe, consequence-free moment. He looked at 2 people and decided their race told him everything he needed to know. He did not ask who they were. He did not look at their applications. He made his judgment from across a lobby in about 10 seconds, and that 10-second decision cost him $3.4 million, his properties, his license, and the career he had spent decades building. Justice is not always fast. It is not always guaranteed, But when people document carefully, persist quietly, and refuse to simply walk away, it comes. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If this made you feel something, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. We cover real cases, real people, and real justice, and your support is what keeps us going. Share this with someone who needs to see it. What do you think was the most satisfying part of this story? Was it the $3.4 million, the loss of his property, the fact that he had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.